Mr. Brantuk, you noted the President's Council, the President's Job Council, and they had this report on Section 404B, their recommendation. Can you expand on why you believe that providing a permanent exemption for 404B is necessary?
The permanent extension of 404, quite honestly, we believe there's no additional value in 404 and just additional costs. I believe one thing we did mention is for companies a suggestion to have these internal controls done every other year. We just think that the additional costs of having these controls for 404 every year are just not necessary.
Now, you also cited testimony regarding the potential negative consequences of companies staying private. You mentioned some research on that. Why is that the case? Why would it matter on a macro level if a given firm decided to remain a privately held company? We had that statistic we talked about earlier here. We've got the majority, or you've got a smaller number of public companies today than you did 10 years ago here in the United States, despite the fact of so many going public overseas. Why would that matter?
Right. It really comes down to job creation. These smaller companies need access to capital to grow and create jobs. And without that access to capital, they really are only left with one option, which is to sell themselves to recognize the true value of their company. One big concern is that there's $1.5 trillion of cash on the balance sheets of U.S. corporations. And we believe that that money is just sitting there and ripe to acquire a number of companies. And as we all know, M&A equals job reductions. IPOs equal job creations. And we believe that is the main focus and driver behind job creation, is fostering and creating a valid IPO capital markets.
So you think this phenomenon of delisting and the mergers and acquisitions that go on in place of it as firms become more inward-looking and as they're not engaged in R&D and don't have access to the capital, and they sort of change their outlook, and as a result it impacts employment here in the United States?
Absolutely. So these companies are looking to where they can fit a niche product or service for a larger corporation in the goal to be acquired. Whereas, looking at it holistically, looking at the innovative nature of the U.S. economy and the U.S. entrepreneurs in the United States, and really grow and strive and thrive, and again raise and create jobs.
In your work with clients, do the disproportionate way in which these costs affect smaller firms relative to larger ones, given the way that larger ones can more easily absorb the costs, does that have an impact? We've got a compliance cost evidence from an SEC survey that suggests that the ratios are 7 to 1 or 8 to 1, something in that neighborhood. What impact does that have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not against regulation, and in fact, NASDAQ is an SRO. We embrace regulation, and we believe that it supports capital formation and protects investors. But we also believe that we just need to strike a balance. It's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of regulation. The ability for a company making $1 billion in revenue to absorb these additional compliance costs are much different than a company making $75 million to absorb these compliance costs.
So, for example, a piece I have from the Wall Street Journal about some of these rules, companies have had to undertake exhaustive investigations of such minor issues as how many people should be required to authorize small customer refunds at a retail location. You're saying that when this happens, the disparate impact on small firms is considerable.
Exactly. I mean, I've heard crazy stories of how, because of 404, companies needed processes in place to order staplers and order business supplies.
So the economies of scale, relative to large firms versus small, would argue that an exemption under a certain amount would be very beneficial in terms of the competitiveness of up-and-coming smaller firms, which are the larger hiring firms, right? The ones that are most likely to hire and grow.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd point to the data of 90% of all jobs are created, new jobs are created after a company goes IPO.